Hello, and welcome to the Arts Our Education Talk It Up podcast, where we talk to national, state, and local leaders who are working to make arts education part of every student's life. I'm Jim Palmarini, your host. This month, ARE is showcasing the Elementary and Secondary School Education Relief Bill, otherwise known as ESSER, and how school districts can use those federal dollars to support their district's arts education programs. So today, we're talking to James Daugherty, the Arts Education and Distance Learning Specialist for Davidson County, North Carolina Schools, and Advocacy Chair for the North Carolina Music Educators Association, and Leigh Little, who is the K-12 Supervisor of Fine Arts for Guilford County, North Carolina Schools, about how they've been able to access and use those federal dollars to help improve access to arts education in their districts. So welcome, James, and welcome, Leigh. So glad you are here.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. So, James, let's start with you. Let's talk about Davidson County. So what are some advocacy strategies that you have used to help teachers secure federal funds to support their arts education programs in your district?
Well, thank you, Jim. And Leigh and I know, are both excited to be here. And I would just say the very first thing and the most important thing, whether you're in a district the size of Davidson County or a larger district like Leigh-Ann's in Guilford County, is building relationships with everyone around you and being very proactive rather than reactive in advocacy work. Too often we tend to want to talk to administrators once things are not going well, but we need to also be talking about what is going well, no matter the situation. So I think those relationships are very important. Knowing who key stakeholders are in your school system, stakeholders is always that token term we use to describe all the people that make things go round. And, for me, the key stakeholder when I taught high school then was the custodian and the school bookkeeper. They were probably the most important people that I dealt with. But, as you get into the bigger picture of the district, it depends on who you need to see. I would say with regard to our conversation today that knowing who the federal programs coordinator is in your school district, and if you don't know who that is, finding out who manages that money is very important. Also, knowing what kind of timelines are in place for federal dollars in a school district and budgeting and that process. A lot of us think that budgets just happen at the end of the year, but as I'm sure Leigh would attest, a lot of decisions about next year's budget begin to take shape in January or February when we're doing enrollment for high schools, because the number of students enrolling in courses begins to have a trickle-down effect for HR and other systems that are in place. So talking to people about your needs by just the time after Christmas is exceptionally important. Understanding how to write and do a needs assessment is really important, and I think we'll get to that a little bit more in the conversation. Making sure that you include everybody, K-12, that you don't focus on just high school, just middle, or just elementary, that everybody's important all the way around. You also have to think about when you're advocating for federal money that you think about how you evaluate the use of that money. Was it effective? Because there are folks that have to turn this information back into the state and federal level. And if you provide that information and documentation, it's going to help your school district so much. And you're likely to be invited back to the table frequently when they have help in that process. I think one of the best things about working in federal funding that I've enjoyed is collecting success stories from teachers. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, and particularly photos and videos and testimonials. Especially when they're shared with legislators at the state and federal level, because as we know, our congressional leaders love hearing from the folks in their districts, but they like hearing even more from students, and that makes a big difference. And I think finally, the last couple things I would say is just using social media to proactively and positively highlight what's going on. I think we'd all agree that in social media, there's just so much that can be negative, but talking about what's positive there again is important. Again, building relationships. And the very last thing I would just add to this is, again, praising what is right.
So, James, you talked about those stories of success. Could you cite a particular story of success in which you were able to make use of those ESSER dollars and it turned into a success story?
Absolutely. I probably have more stories of success with Title IV than I do ESSER, because we're kind of building this plane as we're flying right now, so to speak. So I'm going to maybe put some tracks down about how I think we can get some success in this area. First of all, the having an enrollment inventory for your program, no matter well, particularly for the secondary level. Our elementary teachers don't necessarily have to have enrollment numbers that drive what they're doing, but in the secondary level, having clear data about your number of students that were participating in the year before and the number of students that are participating this year is critical. And if you didn't capture that, it's very easy to go back into PowerSchool or your school database system and look at those numbers. But what you want to be able to do is show that you do have a loss in participation and have a plan for how to make that up. Now, our ESSER money is really focused on helping learning loss, helping schools come back to operate, helping us to kind of get back to a place where we were prior to the pandemic. So we know that safety and health is a big part of this plan. And for years, unfortunately, we know that school band programs and orchestra programs, instrumental programs have had situations where they didn't have enough money to buy a tuba for every student that's participating. And a lot of times we've asked for a tuba and we've been told that's very expensive. You'll have to fundraise to get that. But we're in a very clear place right now that it is not healthy for a student to share an instrument of any kind. It wouldn't matter what it is. And I can tell you this kind of crosses the bridge between Title IV and ESSER. But in our district, we used Title IV money this past fall because of the safety and health issues, and did a major program to buy our schools instruments that were background instruments that were often shared, so we could avoid some of those safety and health issues. And when you start talking about safety and health in a school district, and you remind district leaders that students may be playing the same instrument, this is not a good idea right now, people listen and they want to make things correct in that, because we're definitely in a different world than we were before. There's a lot of conversation going around that I've heard, and I'm sure Leanne has right now, about using ESSER money to hire additional teachers to do enrichment or to support. In my district, and it may be because we're a little smaller, maybe a little more conservative than some districts, I'm not sure that idea would get a lot of traction because we're worried about, we don't have enough math teachers, we don't have enough English teachers, we got to have more sections to catch kids up. So I've kind of turned that idea around a little bit in the district, and my leaders have been very receptive to thinking through this process. Because ESSER funds are only for 3 years and they can be allocated each year up through September 30th, that we don't want to obligate hiring a new teacher for a program that might go away in 3 years. So I've asked for the idea of, if we do need additional math, science, social studies, ELA teachers, that we fund those positions that are likely going to be temporary anyway with ESSER money, and hold harmless our music positions and our arts positions, so that we don't have teachers who are threatened or they don't have the opportunity to rebuild their numbers, because we know the next couple of years are going to be a rebuilding process for middle and elementary programs. Middle and high school programs. So I think those are some of the key things that I've kind of honed in on. In North Carolina, we even asked our legislature through NCMEA if they would consider holding harmless our school districts from last year's enrollment numbers to this year. And our budget process is not finished, but I do know in speaking with NCMEA that is a consideration for our legislature for this year. It is not a funded mandate, because you don't have to have money to hold harmless. And we see that as a big win.
I think that what you're saying about enrollment numbers is something I have heard elsewhere, concerned about maintaining programs over the next few years and rebuilding student investment and program investment. So, James, I know you are also a Title IV specialist. And regarding Title IV ESSER funds. They're both federal dollars, but the deadlines are different and some of the requirements are different. How do you communicate that to administrators and your arts education teachers?
Well, that's a great question, Jim, because there is a lot of confusion right now with this influx of federal money. And if any district was using Title IV, now we have ESSER, and maybe the biggest thing is, what is the difference in these two things? And even in the acronym, the ESSER is the Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds, ESSER. And just knowing that in itself is important because it has the word emergency and relief, and it's short term. ESSA funding or the ESEA funding has been around since 1965. It was originally the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act, and then it's gone through reiterations, No Child Left Behind, and most recently ESSA. What we do know for the state and federal level is that all of this money really is working through the same person, and the deadlines are very similar as far as getting plans together, although their deadlines to spend are different. Most of this ESSER money is short term, like I mentioned before. There was the CARES Act, which was ESSER 1. Then there's ESSER 2 that came out. And then the last reiteration was the American Rescue Plan. That's ESSER 3. And districts have to obligate or use those monies at a certain time. I would say for most school districts that if you're going to put in a request to use money or have a plan for it, it needs to really happen by June. And don't lose hope if we're now in July and you're just now learning about this money, because a lot of school districts, I think mine included, kind of wrote a bucket of an idea in their plan. They didn't specify exactly what it would be spent for. They categorized it very broadly. So there's still a way to ask for some of the money, but we do have longer term goals that we can use to ask for more intensive type things. Does that help answer the question, Jim?
It does. Just talking about the difference between the acronyms is, I think, a great starting point.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, well, thanks, James. We'll get back to you in a minute. Leanne, so how have you been using ESSER funds to help improve access to arts education in Guilford County?
Well, currently we have a focus on ESSER funds in our summer school programming, and I'm sure like every district across the state, we have a summer school site at every school. Some sites are shared because of construction and other things, but at least 2/3 of our specialists at each site are an art, music, theater, or dance teacher. There is PE because of the requirement of 30 minutes of movement every day. We're also currently using it we wrote curriculum for our summer school so that we've asked a lot of our teachers since March 2020. And so providing lesson plans, curriculum, and supplies for our teachers did help encourage them, as well as the pay, to work summer school, because we had a lot of conversations of what is your level of burnout, because the pay may be good, but is this good for you? That kind of thing. So we're also focusing, like James said, on purchasing instruments for students who may not otherwise be able to afford an instrument and they don't have to share as part of health and safety. There's also, we've spent a large amount of money on PPE for band, which includes the slotted face mask and bell covers. And we bought that with the first round of money with the CARES Act. And that was a focus, was making sure that when students come back, that they are able to participate in their performing arts classes. It's easier to sanitize in a visual arts class. There are multiple ways you can do that, but we have to make sure that we were following CDC guidelines, staying in line with current aerosol studies so that we are not spreading COVID, that we had multiple mitigation strategies to keep our classrooms safe. And then we also focused on instructional support. So purchasing digital curriculum that can be used by teachers for distance learning, because in Guilford County, we had a staggered approach to reentry. So elementary came back, and then after the new year, we had sixth grade and ninth grade, if I remember correctly, and then a slow integration of 2 days for cohort A and then 2 days for cohort B. And then finally, by spring break, I think we were all back in. So the digital curriculum was helpful for teachers who had never taught distance. They never took a distance learning class. So all of this was brand new for them. So we did purchase the Art of Ed, which our visual arts teachers love. Quaver offered a pilot program for us, and I think that they did it for multiple districts. And for the 2021-22 school year, in addition to those, we're looking at purchasing Digital Theater Plus. I don't want to say that we have, because our new fiscal year just started last week. So we did have to wait to purchase those things. And then we have a couple other programs that we're looking at purchasing. And then we're also focusing on professional development for teachers in 2021-22 to help teachers take all of these digital learning tools and strategies that they've learned, and how can they incorporate it and create a flipped classroom, a hybrid classroom? What are our snow days going to look like? That kind of thing.
Leanne, you have also talked about something called an arts bus, which is a way to get to students, I would assume, in the rural part of the county. Could you talk a little bit about that and using those dollars towards that?
Yeah, of course. Our superintendent has been key in really pushing our thinking and getting us outside of our box, because I know, like James said, we need to be proactive and not reactive. But at the beginning of this, we were very reactive, like how can we still support our teachers and students? And now we're thinking towards the future, how are we still going to provide access to students who may be virtual, who may be homebound, who may not have access to after school programming. So the arts bus is part of their 7 like priority buckets, like James talked about, that we have a very rough draft plan that we've submitted. And the beautiful thing about that is that if we feel like we need to change based off the needs, we can. So the mobile bus is something that is for community support. So it could be rural, it could be urban, it could be for areas that don't have access to arts programming after school. So we're kind of eradicating, we are focusing on eradicating racial wealth gaps with this bus. So this bus not only provides access to the arts, but it will provide access to academic tutoring. Now, whether it's one bus or multiple buses, I'm not entirely sure yet, because I have no clue how much a bus costs. And we'll have to upfit the bus to be able to house the supplies that it needs.
Well, I think it's a great idea, and I hope that happens. So let's move on to a couple of questions for both of you. And James, you alluded to the needs assessment. So if a teacher is really interested in applying for federal funds to support their programs, why and what is a needs assessment, and why is it so important?
That's a great question. And so many of us that are teaching in the classroom wouldn't understand that and wouldn't have any idea of what to do. You know, if we need something, the first thing we want to do is go ask our principal with an I need. And that's okay. But what we know from a needs assessment is it can be done in a lot of different ways. But essentially, you're looking at your inventory of what you have, what you don't have, and you're asking questions that drive data to support why you need what you want. So for the work that I've done with Title IV in some other grant programs is often we'll use a Google form. We'll survey and ask stakeholders, again, you know, those people that are involved. Title IV does require needs assessments once every 3 years. Title I, and many of you that are listening to this podcast have probably participated in a needs assessment and you didn't even realize that's what you were doing for federal money, because the school districts are required that have Title I money to do a needs assessment every year. But essentially, you're asking questions about what you do and what you want to do. And the great thing about a needs assessment that my boss taught me is that you learn to write the questions to show you the data to support what you want. So if you know that you need a set number of instruments or you need supplies and materials, then you write your questions to ask and highlight that you have a deficiency in that area. And of course, your data is probably going to reflect that, and you use that data to help you write a narrative. All of this federal money requires someone to enter a request into for most states, a state-based Department of Education, Department of Public Instruction online form. In North Carolina, it's the CCIP, or the Continuous Comprehensive Improvement Plan. I can't even, it's hard for me to believe I understand and remember all these acronyms. I would, if somebody had said CCIP, I'd have thought it was some foreign country when I was teaching school. But it's basically the school improvement plan for the school district with regard to federal money. But in the CCIP, they ask you, what do you need the money for? How are you going to use it? What's your plan to evaluate if it was effective or not? What documentation can you provide of the use? And so that's the basic premise of a needs assessment. But for me as an individual teacher, I don't have to be as extensive as that. It could be as simple as explaining through the inventory. You know, I have 6 tuba players. I have 2 instruments. You know, going to your administrator with data, not just a want, but you know, I want this. Or one example that comes to my mind is we don't often think about using technology in the arts, but there's a lot of great programs, and you know, a lot of school boards right now are very hesitant about wanting to put more money into programs because they want human resources, and we all understand that. But there are great systems and programs in place that support learning on different levels. So I've often thought about music theory as an example, where if you can show there's learning loss in middle school students, chorus or band, and you know there's a gap in their music literacy, even in elementary, you know, that data, if you can collect it through this year, maybe do a pre-assessment, or you can compare to previous data, and show there's a loss, you know, there may be funding that you can put aside to help support a program like Quaver or any of these other programs we've mentioned. That could be very useful. So basically the needs assessment is just getting to the heart and documenting of why you need what you need.
So Leanne, I think you might have mentioned at one point in an earlier presentation about thinking long-term about what would your ideal program look like. So that's a different kind of needs assessment. Could you talk about that for a bit?
Sure. So we currently have 2 going on with our band directors. The first one is a music instrument needs assessment, and we asked teachers about a bazillion questions, and I've apologized up front for the length of the surveys, but it does ask, like, it breaks it down by instrument. How many this size cellos do you have? How many of them are in working order? How many of them can be repaired? How many would you need if your program grows in 3 to 4 years? So that we're looking at what you have that works and what do you need to get your program to where you think it can grow in 3 to 4 years while we have this ESSER funding. So we have been working with Conn-Selmer to create like this list of instruments, because they have it might have ended, but they had a stimulus program where some instruments were essentially BOGO. So what can we purchase and make the best use of our money, but also grow our program? So are they basic instruments? And I am not a music person. I was a visual artist, or I am a visual artist. So do you need trumpets and tubas and clarinets, or do you need marimbas and timpanis? Like, what do you need to make your program grow? And then the second one we currently have going on is for marching band uniforms. So we have money set aside because some of our uniforms are 16, 18 years old, and you could have a parent and a current student who wore the same uniform. So we're looking at how much have you spent in the past? How many uniforms do you need? How many would you need if your program grows to where it could potentially go? So we're trying to figure out what is an average cost of the uniform, and then based off of that, like, how many uniforms can a school get, because schools that have larger programs will obviously need more uniforms than schools who have smaller programs. But what can we do to help you grow your program? And then we've had a few in the past for the, because we've talked a lot about music. For dance, like, do you need portable ballet bars? Do you need a dance floor? Theater, like, what kind of things do you need to help with your set design? And in visual art, when I was in the classroom, I do remember receiving a survey that says, what basic supplies do you have and what do you need, kind of based off of, this is a list of things that all visual art programs should have.
You know, I think what you've talked about might seem very fundamental and obvious, but sometimes, as we all know, arts teachers are so busy, they don't have the time to reflect, or maybe nobody has ever asked them. So I think that's great advice. Thank you guys so much. Just as a wrap up, what other advice would you offer to either an administrator who's still trying to figure all this federal funding out, or an arts teacher who's just interested in seeing what they can do, that this is possible for them? Any final thoughts about that?
I would say, first of all, again, build those relationships. Make sure that you're having these conversations frequently and at good times with your administrators. You know, I remember I knew when, with the different principals I had, I knew which time of day was the best time to talk to them, depending on what they had to deal with and who was there and who wasn't there. So, you know, you don't want to come in with your request at the worst part of their day. So you want to make sure you know when to go in. But as I work with visual art teachers, with theater teachers, and music teachers, getting those folks together to have these conversations and working in that collaborative team and that quote unquote PLC kind of group, even though a lot of times these folks are singletons at their schools, their ideas are much greater and more powerful when they are a collaborative force together. So even though there are individual needs, I would say in the current spirit we're in, and getting back to a place where we were, you know, maybe brainstorming ideas about how cooperative projects across the school district. I love Leanne's idea that Guilford is doing with the art bus, but anything that could come together to unify, to bring a sense of togetherness and great communication and positivity for the school environment would be great. Those are the main things, and just share those stories, making sure that they communicate back to the school administrator and the school district. I would tag in, because we are in this Arts Are for Education call, that I talked to my superintendent about the proclamation early on about supporting the arts in the future.
Thank you.
And our district did support it, and there are several in North Carolina that have, or in the process, and I think that we're all really excited about that. But in my head, and I hope that my bosses don't listen to this, but I think they would laugh if they did. I strategically began that conversation sometime in March, because I knew the proclamation would take 1 or 2 months, depending on whether they did it. And you know, to be honest, it's hard to pass a proclamation as a board member in April or May that you're supporting the arts, but then turn around and make any kind of cuts to it a month or two later. So being strategic and I only share that not as anything negative, but being strategic about your ask and when they happen is really important too.
I definitely appreciate your insight and your acknowledgement of the Arts for Education proclamation. Thank you for that. Leanne, final thoughts?
I think it's the same as James. You need to be strategic, and you need to know who your key stakeholders, not stakeholders, who your key district people are, because our district as a whole has applied for these funds. So if you are a teacher in need of something and you're not at a charter school or a private school, you may want to seek out the people at the district and say, hey, these are the needs of my program, and here's some data behind it. And I really want my program to succeed and flourish. And I feel like the pressure is on for Guilford, because I have submitted to the board to sign the proclamation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
And Leanne, I would add to that, the biggest thing of any of this, no matter what happens, don't forget to say thank you. Always go back and email and write notes and thank the people. You may not always get what you want, but that continued word of praise is going to go a long way down the road.
So true. And
agreed.
At that, thank you both for sharing your good work and what you're doing with students to support students and teachers in both your districts in North Carolina. I think what you have offered is applicable across the country. So at that, a couple of things. If you want to learn more about ESSER, go to the Arts Our Education Action Center. We have a whole raft of resources there that can help you learn more about what to do in your district. And if you want to learn more from James or Leanne, we are sharing their emails here on the screen. And if you want to reach out to me or the Arts Our Education campaign, you can reach me at artsoureducation.org. And at that, it's a wrap. Leanne and James, thank you so much again for being here. And thank you all for coming to the Arts Our Education Talk It Up podcast. We will see you the next time. Bye-bye, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.